Before we dive into today's tale, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment about your favorite HFY moment, and subscribe for more of the best Humanity First stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. The jungle of Zithron 9 was alive with a sound that unsettled even seasoned explorers. Clicking cries carried through the dense canopy, low rumblings echoed from far ridges, and the thick air reeked of wet soil and unseen predators. To the Velar expeditionary crew, it was hell wrapped in green and shadow. Their captain, Darrick Velan, moved silently at the head of the formation, his silver carapace armor reflecting faint starlight through the gaps in the foliage. The mission was simple: survey the region, confirm reports of high-energy crystal deposits, and return alive. Yet nothing ever felt simple on Zithron 9. Behind him, younger Velar soldiers glanced at their scanners, mandibles twitching with nervous tics. Every spike in movement readings made them jerk their weapons tighter. They all knew what stalked these jungles. The Kothrak. Legends carved into Velar culture named the Kothrak as more myth than beast. Six-limbed giants, armored hides impervious to blaster fire, maws lined with tusks and serrated teeth. They were apex predators that ruled entire ecosystems. To encounter one was synonymous with death. So when the sensor array spiked with proximity alerts, a ripple of panic slithered through the crew. Movement. Massive size. Heading straight for us, one soldier whispered, his translator crackling with static. Darrick raised a hand, trying to silence the rising fear. His own throat was dry, yet he forced his voice to stay level. Hold formation. Defensive perimeter. Weapons at full charge. The jungle stilled as though the forest itself held its breath. Branches cracked somewhere ahead, deliberate and heavy. The Velar readied for slaughter. Then from the darkness came the strangest figure of all, a human. The man was tall, lean-muscled, his steps unhurried as though this nightmare world was a garden he had strolled since childhood. He wore a torn field jacket, dirt-stained but sturdy, and on his back rested a pack weighted with gear. His eyes, a pale steel color, swept over the Velar formation without a flicker of fear. Mason Hale, he introduced himself, voice calm, almost casual. Didn't expect company out here. The Velar soldiers froze, stunned not just by his sudden appearance but by his demeanor. Darrick had encountered humans before, reckless traders, bold pilots, but none carried themselves with such disarming serenity, as if being lost in a death-world jungle was a minor inconvenience. "You should not be here," Darrick managed. His voice was low but edged with command. "This region is not safe for your kind." Mason tilted his head, studying the captain's stance, then glanced toward the shifting shadows behind him. "Not safe for anyone," he admitted with a faint smile. "But don't worry. I'm not alone." The words had barely left his mouth when the ground trembled. A guttural growl rolled through the trees like thunder. Every Velar froze. The Kothrak had arrived. It emerged from the canopy like a nightmare stepped into reality. Nearly 3 stories tall, hide-plated with natural armor, its 6 claws sank into the mud with crushing weight. Eyes gleamed yellow in the dim light, locking on the Velar soldiers who already fumbled to bring their weapons to bear. "Fire!" one shouted, panic-breaking discipline. "Hold!" Darrick snapped, though his voice cracked. The beast was already lowering its tusked head, and instinct screamed it was about to charge. Mason stepped forward. Not rushed, not afraid, he simply walked out between the line of trembling alien rifles and the towering predator. One hand rose slowly, palm open, as if greeting an old friend. The Kothrak lowered its massive head toward him, jaws spreading wide enough to swallow him whole. Several Velar cried out, certain the human was about to be devoured. Yet instead of tearing him apart, the beast halted. Mason's hand touched the armored snout, fingers brushing the grooves of its plated hide. The Kothrak rumbled, a sound that should have heralded slaughter, but instead it resembled something closer to a purr. The giant predator leaned into his touch. The Velar could not process what they were seeing. Darrick's mandibles parted in disbelief, words refusing to form. The soldiers whispered in horror. A human, fragile, soft-skinned, mortal, stood calmly petting the most dreaded apex predator of the quadrant. Mason glanced back at their stunned faces, his tone maddeningly casual. "Easy, isn't it? They're not all teeth and claws if you treat them right." The Kothrak settled its weight, crouching protectively near him, tusks gleaming. Mason scratched behind a ridge of bone on its head as though it were some oversized companion animal. Every Velar instinct screamed that this scene was impossible. Apex predators could not be domesticated. They slaughtered without mercy, respected no authority but their own hunger. Yet here, on this cursed world, A human defied biology, instinct, and legend itself with nothing more than calm presence and an open hand. Darrick tried to find words, but his voice failed him. He watched the Kothrak nudge its snout against Mason's shoulder, watched the human grin faintly as though this were all perfectly natural. Around them, the soldiers shifted uneasily, torn between awe and terror. At last Mason broke the silence. "You're going to want to put those rifles down," he said gently. "He doesn't like when people point things at me." As if on cue, the Kothrak's golden eyes flicked toward the Velar line, a rumble rising from its chest. Several soldiers lowered their weapons immediately, unable to withstand that gaze. Darrick forced his body rigid, though every instinct begged him to retreat. Slowly, deliberately he lowered his own weapon. The soldiers followed. The forest fell silent again, but this time it was filled with a different tension, not the dread of being hunted, but the terror of realizing their understanding of the universe had just been shattered. Mason patted the predator once more and leaned lightly against its armored shoulder. "See? Nothing to fear," he said almost kindly. Then his eyes met Darrick's, sharp beneath their calm exterior. "Well, unless you give me a reason." The words lingered in the damp air like a warning. The Velar captain realized then that their mission had just changed. They had not simply stumbled into a mineral survey. They had stumbled into a revelation. Humans did not merely survive worlds of death. Somehow, impossibly, they befriended them. The jungle stirred again with distant howls, echoing from ridges beyond. Darrick felt his chest tighten, his soldiers glance uneasily at him, and Mason turned his head toward the sound with that same infuriating calm. "It seems we'll have company soon," Mason said. He rested his hand casually against the Kothrak's hide, as though bracing for nothing more than conversation. "You might want to stick close." Darrick felt the weight of every tale his people had ever told about predators, death worlds, and legends carved into the stars. But nothing compared to this. One human standing at the center of it all, smiling as death itself bowed to his touch. And though fear gnawed at his mind, another emotion pressed forward in equal strength. Curiosity. Captain Darrick Velan could not force the image from his mind. The human standing unflinching before a Kothrak, touching the beast with the familiarity of a man greeting an old comrade. It was an affront to reason, to science, to every cultural memory the Velar carried of predators that devoured armies. Yet the evidence stood before him, undeniable. The Kothrak still crouched beside Mason Hale, armored hide glistening with dew, yellow eyes half-lidded in something disturbingly close to contentment. The Velar soldiers shifted uneasily in formation. They whispered through their private channels, the clicking rhythm of their native speech carrying unease even into the translator's tones. Darrick cut their chatter with a single gesture, though he himself struggled to maintain composure. If panic spread, discipline would shatter. "You should explain," Darrick said at last, his voice edged in steel to hide its tremor. "How is this possible? No creature of Zitharon 9 submits to control." Mason gave a shrug, his expression calm to the point of arrogance. "He's not controlled. He's trusted. There's a difference." His hand never left the Kothrak's plated head, fingers tracing lines between armored ridges as though soothing a restless horse. One soldier hissed sharply, mandibles clicking in agitation. "Captain, this must be some trick. The human distracts it while." The Kothrak's head snapped toward the soldier, eyes glowing, tusks glinting in the faint light. The soldier nearly dropped his weapon in panic. Mason gave a quiet sound, half whistle, half wordless hum, and the predator's posture softened at once. The man chuckled lightly. "See? He knows I don't like it when my friends are threatened." The word friend landed like a stone in Darrick's chest. Friend. The concept was absurd. A Kothrak could no more be a friend than an eruption could be a neighbor. Yet here it sat, docile as a hound beside this human. Darrick studied him more closely. Mason Hale was no untrained wanderer. His posture carried military discipline, every motion deliberate and practiced. Yet his eyes betrayed none of the cold calculation of soldiers. They held something else, an unnerving blend of patience and quiet confidence. He acted as though he belonged here, as though the galaxy's most dangerous creatures were nothing more than companions met on a long road. Darrick's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Explain how you achieved this." Mason's lips curved in a faint smile, not mocking but disarmingly casual. "You could say I raised him. Found him as a cub, half dead from a fall, leg broken. I patched him up, kept him alive. From then on he stuck with me. Simple as that." Simple? The word escaped before Darrick could stop it. He caught himself and straightened, forcing composure back into his voice. You claim to have raised one of the galaxy's most feared predators as if it were a domesticated vermin? Mason tilted his head. You've got it wrong. I didn't domesticate him. You can't bend something like this into obedience. I learned how he thinks, what he respects. And I respected him in return. He gave the Kothrak another scratch behind its plated crest. The massive predator rumbled like distant thunder, leaning into the touch. The soldiers backed away another step, unable to disguise their terror. Even Darrick felt the pull of instinct, the urge to retreat from a being that had ended civilizations on this very world. Yet the human stood firm, no armor, no shield, only trust. One of the younger Velar scientists, his voice trembling, muttered through the calm, "It should not be possible. Neural aggression thresholds, feral dominance cycles, it violates every known model of predator psychology." Mason glanced at him, an eyebrow raised. "Maybe your models are wrong. Or maybe you've just never tried listening." The remark stung more than Darrick cared to admit. For centuries, Velar expeditions had catalogued life forms, analyzed them, dissected them when necessary. Never had any scholar proposed bonding with a Kothrak. It was madness, an insult to reason. And yet, before his eyes, the impossible stood undeniable. Darrick turned to his men, his tone sharp. "Keep your discipline. Do not provoke it." Then to Mason he asked, "And what if it turns on you? What then?" Mason's expression did not change. "Then it turns on me. That's the risk you take with trust. But he hasn't yet. That should tell you something." Silence fell. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. Darrick felt the edges of his understanding begin to fray. The Velar had built an empire on caution, on calculated risk and strict adherence to order. Yet here was a human who waded into chaos with nothing but nerve and patience, and somehow emerged alive. As if to deepen the madness, Mason placed 2 fingers to his lips and gave a short whistle. The jungle stirred. Branches cracked. And from the shadows, another Kothrak emerged. Smaller than the first, its hide scarred with old wounds, it prowled forward on 6 massive limbs. The soldiers tensed again, weapons twitching up. Mason raised his hand quickly. "Easy. This one's a bit more skittish. Found her after she got caught in a trap. Took a long time to get her to trust me." The second Kothrak pressed its armored head against his side, nearly knocking him off balance. Mason laughed softly and steadied it with practiced ease. The first predator growled low, protective, before settling again. The Velar line broke into quiet, frantic whispers. Some muttered prayers to ward off evil, others insisted this was a hallucination. Darrick silenced them with a furious gesture, though his own mind reeled. The human had bonded with 2 of them. "This is madness," Darrick whispered, not even realizing he had spoken aloud. Mason met his gaze evenly. "To you maybe. To me it's survival. You can't fight a world like this with just weapons. You've got to understand it. Respect it. Only then will it respect you back." The words carried an unsettling weight. They were simple, but they cut deeper than any lecture. Darrick felt the edge of fear gnawing at his mind, but alongside it rose a new unease: respect. The Velar Empire had conquered countless worlds, mastered countless species. But this was different. This was not mastery by strength or dominance. This was something subtler and in its own way more dangerous. The Kothrak stirred, their immense forms shifting as though sensing a distant vibration. Mason's eyes narrowed, his head tilting toward the dark canopy. "Others are near," he murmured. "Not mine. Wild ones." The Velar line rippled with fear. Weapons were raised despite orders, mandibles clicking in instinctive terror. Darrick knew the danger of wild packs. A single Kothrak was catastrophe, but several meant extinction. He turned to Mason. "If what you claim is true, then stop them. Prove this madness has purpose." Mason regarded him for a moment, eyes cool and unreadable. Then he gave a short nod. "Stay behind me. And for your own sake, don't fire unless I say so." The words carried an authority Darrick had not expected, not from a lone human far from his people. Yet in that moment, surrounded by impossible predators and the shifting jungle beyond, Darrick found himself obeying. The soldiers looked to him for confirmation. His mandibles clicked once in frustration, then he gave the reluctant order. "Stand down. We will follow the human's lead." The Kothrak rumbled, their massive heads rising, gazes fixed on the forest. The sound of breaking branches grew louder, closer. Darrick's soldiers tightened their grips on their rifles, but their captain forced them still. Mason stepped forward into the clearing, the 2 predators at his side. He rolled his shoulders once, steady, then spoke without turning back. You wanted to know how it's possible? You're about to see. The jungle split, and the night filled with the growl of more Kothrak approaching. The jungle broke apart with a violence that made the Velar soldiers recoil. Branches snapped like brittle bones, leaves scattered into the humid air, and from the darkness emerged shapes too large for the eye to accept at first glance. The pack of Kothrak stepped into view, their armored hides reflecting faint starlight. They were leaner than Mason's companions, scarred, savage, and restless. Their eyes locked onto the cluster of aliens and the human who stood unflinching between them. The Velar formation wavered. Instinct screamed to scatter, to unleash weapons fire until the trees themselves burned. Darrick Velan knew if he gave the order, every soldier would obey. Yet some quiet, dreadful instinct urged him to hold. Against reason he found himself watching the human. Mason Hale stood with a stillness that was almost ritual. His two bonded Kothrak moved beside him, one lowering her tusks in a warning rumble, the other tensing to spring. Mason's eyes fixed on the approaching predators, and he gave a low whistle that carried strangely far through the night. The sound was not loud, but it resonated with the beasts. The wild Kothrak paused, their heads tilting, uncertain. Derek's mandibles clicked nervously. "This is suicide," he murmured. But his soldiers looked to him for orders, and he forced himself to remain silent. For reasons he could not yet name, he needed to see what would happen. Mason extended a hand, palm outward, body language calm yet commanding. His voice, quiet but firm, cut through the oppressive stillness. "Not enemies. Not prey. Just passing through." The words were meaningless to the Velar without translation, yet the predators reacted. The lead Kothrak growled low, its breath steaming in the cool night air, then took a step closer. Mason did not move. His companions rumbled defensively, but at another soft whistle they eased, holding their ground without striking. The tension was unbearable. One of the Velar soldiers whispered, "He speaks to them as if they are people." "Silence," Darrick snapped, though his own mind echoed the sentiment. It did look like conversation, bizarre and impossible. The predators shifted uneasily, then at last, with guttural huffs, the pack veered away, melting back into the forest. The undergrowth swallowed them until only their fading growls lingered. The relief that swept through the Velar line was palpable. Weapons lowered with shaking hands and several soldiers slumped where they stood. Darrick himself felt his carapace damp with condensation, every nerve still straining for danger. Yet the clearing held only the human, his two beasts, and a silence so thick it seemed unreal. Mason turned back to them, his expression unreadable. "Now you see," he said simply. "Violence isn't always the answer." His calmness was infuriating but also disarming. Darrick stepped forward, mandibles tight. "What you have done defies every law of predator behavior known to science. You walk among them as if they are kin." "How?" Mason studied him for a moment, then gave a slow exhale. "When I first found him," he said, nodding toward the larger of his companions, "he was bleeding out. Young, weak, starving. I should have walked away. Every survival instinct said leave him. But something in his eyes, fear, pain, maybe just a chance, I couldn't." He crouched, resting a hand against the armored shoulder of the beast. The predator closed its eyes, leaning slightly into the touch. "I treated him. Kept him alive. Fed him. Day after day I showed him I wasn't a threat. That I cared whether he lived. Eventually he believed me. That belief grew into trust. And trust is stronger than fear." The words fell into the clearing with a weight none of the Velar could ignore. They contradicted every lesson of their culture. To the Velar, survival meant caution, distance, calculation. Trust was weakness. Yet here was proof that trust could turn death itself into an ally. One of the soldiers hissed, voice rising with unease. "Captain, this is unnatural. Dangerous. The human twists nature itself. Perhaps he is cursed." Another chimed in, trembling. "Or chosen. Perhaps his species is favored by the gods of death." Darrick silenced them with a sharp gesture, though their words gnawed at him. Cursed or chosen, it hardly mattered. What mattered was that Mason Hale had done what no Velar could imagine. "You risked your life for a creature that should have killed you," Darrick said. His voice carried both accusation and reluctant respect. Mason met his gaze evenly. "Life without risk isn't life. You people see monsters. I see possibilities. You call them predators. I call them survivors. Maybe that's why we understand each other." The remark cut deeper than Darrick wished to admit. The Velar saw humans as reckless, too impulsive to survive in the long run. Yet here stood a human who had survived in a place no Velar expedition had endured more than days. Not by firepower, not by fortifications, but by bending the impossible with patience and audacity. The scientist stepped forward, shaking. This cannot be repeated. It must not. If humans can bond with apex predators, the balance of galactic order will collapse. Who could stand against a species that befriends what we fear most? The word spread unease through the ranks. Soldiers exchanged glances, mandibles twitching with anxiety. For the first time, Darrick saw not just fear of the predators, but fear of the human himself. Mason must have sensed it. His voice dropped lower, softer, though it carried an edge of steel. You think I did this to threaten anyone? I didn't tame them for war. I saved them because I could. That's all. That is all. Darrick repeated, incredulous. You wield a power that shakes empires and you call it nothing? Mason gave a faint smile, almost sad. Sometimes the smallest choices change everything. You'll see. The silence that followed pressed heavy on them all. The jungle stirred faintly, insects trilling in the damp night. Darrick looked at the predators, at the human, at his trembling soldiers, and realized the truth no commander wished to face. The galaxy would never see humans the same way again. One soldier whispered what all of them thought but dared not say aloud. If they can do this here, what can they do elsewhere? Darrick turned sharply, silencing him. But the thought burned in his own mind as well. If humans could bond with the unbondable, if they could turn predators into allies, what chance did any empire have of controlling them? Humanity had always been underestimated, regarded as bold but fragile. Now, in this clearing, that illusion shattered. Mason broke the tension by moving toward the tree line. His beasts followed, massive shadows against the starlight. He glanced back once. You should get some rest. It'll be quiet tonight. They'll keep watch. They? Darrick echoed, disbelieving. Mason's faint grin returned. My friends. With that, he vanished into the darkness, his companions padding silently behind him. The Velar soldiers stood stunned, afraid even to speak. Darrick forced his body upright, commanding authority he barely felt. Establish perimeter. No one fires without my order. They obeyed, though unease lingered. Darrick did not move. He stared into the dark where the human had gone, the image of armored beasts curled around him like guardians etched into his mind. His mandibles clicked once in thought. Humanity had been a curiosity, a young species testing its wings. But tonight, Darrick understood something deeper, something more unsettling. The human was not just a survivor. He was a revelation. And revelations had a way of rewriting the galaxy. The warning came at dawn, when the jungle was still heavy with mist and the soldiers were struggling to maintain their brittle courage. A distant tremor pulsed through the earth, subtle at first, then growing into a steady rhythm that rattled the equipment stakes and sent ripples across the water pooled in the roots. The Velar soldiers snapped awake, mandibles clicking in alarm as scanners flared red. Approaching life forms, enormous, fast and numerous. Captain Darrick Velan clenched his jaw as the readings sharpened into clarity. A rogue pack larger than any they had yet seen, was bearing down on the encampment. At its center was something even worse. A Kothrak Alpha, far greater in size than the others, scarred by decades of brutal dominance. This was no ordinary predator. It was the nightmare that kept even apex creatures at bay, a beast so feral it had become a legend among explorers. The soldiers fell into chaos. Some screamed for evacuation, others scrambled to power up weapons, their discipline unraveling. Darrick barked orders, forcing them into line, but he could feel the weight of futility pressing down on his command. Blaster fire would barely scorch such creatures. Their perimeter would collapse within moments of contact. The Velar Dominion had warned that death was inevitable on this world. And now death was coming to collect. Mason Hale stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the shifting treeline with that same maddening calm. His two bonded Kothrak bristled, tusks bared, growls reverberating like engines. He knelt briefly, placing his hands on their armored hides, steadying them as one might steady anxious soldiers before battle. His voice, low and even, carried across the hush of fear. Stay behind me. Do not fire unless you're ready to see this turn bloody fast. Darrick spun toward him, fury breaking through his mask of command. You cannot expect us to sit idle while an alpha leads a pack into our midst. We will be slaughtered. Mason's eyes flicked to him, steel gray and unyielding. You'll be slaughtered if you fight them. Your weapons can't win this. Trust me. Trust them. He gestured to the towering beasts beside him. This is their world. I've walked it long enough to know the only chance you've got is letting me handle it. The word struck Darrick like a blade. Trust. That cursed word again, the word that had undone every certainty his people lived by. His soldiers looked to him, their terror raw, waiting for his decision. To follow the human's command was madness. To defy it was death. Slowly, with the weight of inevitability, Darrick lowered his weapon. His mandibles clicked sharply as he gave the order. Hold position. No fire without command. The jungle erupted. The Alpha burst into the clearing first, its bulk dwarfing even Mason's bonded companions. Its hide was ridged with scars, tusks jagged and broken from countless battles. The ground shook beneath its charge and the velar line faltered. Behind it streamed the rest of the pack, smaller but no less lethal, claws tearing through roots and soil. Mason stepped forward. He did not draw a weapon. He raised both arms, palms open, and gave a sharp whistle that cut through the roar like a blade. His Kothrak surged to meet the intruders, colliding with thunderous force. The clearing shook with the impact, armored hides crashing together, tusks grinding, claws raking through soil and bark. The velar soldiers could only watch, frozen, as death fought death before their eyes. Mason moved with a terrifying composure. Every time the Alpha's massive head swung, he shifted just enough to avoid the blow, never retreating, always present. His voice carried commands, low whistles, short clicks, guttural words not meant for alien ears. His bonded Kothrak obeyed, striking in coordinated bursts, harrying the Alpha with tusks and claws. But the beast was immense, relentless, its rage unshakable. It hurled one of Mason's companions aside with a violent strike that would have pulped a lesser creature. The velar soldiers broke into shouts of despair, weapons rising in defiance of their captain's order. Darrick himself felt his nerve falter. Yet Mason did not. He sprinted toward the downed Kothrak, shouting a command that sent the others surging to intercept the Alpha. The two titans clashed, the jungle splitting with the sound of their fury. Mason slid to the wounded beast, pressed his hands against its armored neck, and whispered words that seemed more prayer than command. The Kothrak rose, trembling but alive, eyes burning with renewed fury. Darrick felt his pulse racing, his own fear mixing with something else, an emotion alien to his people. Oh! The battle raged on, Mason orchestrating with whistles and gestures, each movement binding chaos into pattern. Then came the moment that froze the clearing. The Alpha turned from the bonded beasts and lunged straight at Mason. Its maw opened wide, tusks ready to cleave him in half. Darrick cried out without meaning to, certain the human was finished. But Mason did not run. He stood his ground, hand outstretched, eyes locked on the beast. At the final instant, when jaws closed around him, his voice cracked like thunder. Enough. The word was not magic, but the force behind it carried through the clearing like a strike. The Alpha froze, tusks trembling inches from his body. Its growl shook the trees, its breath washed over him in fetid heat. Mason did not flinch. His hand pressed against its scarred snout, steady, unwavering. The predator trembled, snarling, fighting against instinct. Then, slowly, impossibly, it lowered its head. The jungle fell silent. The velar soldiers stared in disbelief as the Alpha, the nightmare of their legends, bowed before a human. Mason held its gaze for a long moment, then exhaled and stepped back. The beast rumbled once, then turned and stalked away into the forest. The rest of the pack followed, slinking into the shadows, leaving the clearing shattered but alive. No one spoke. The silence was thicker than any roar. Mason turned back to them, dirt streaking his face, sweat shining on his brow, but his eyes calm as ever. He rested a hand on one of his companions, who leaned against him wearily. "Told you," he said quietly. "Trust works better than firepower." Darrick's mandibles parted, but no words came. His soldiers fell to their knees, some muttering prayers, others staring at the human with wide, terrified eyes. Mason brushed mud from his hands and looked at them all, expression unreadable. "You see monsters," he said. "I see survivors. I see life worth saving. That's the difference between us." Darrick felt something crumble inside him. Everything he had believed, the certainty that order, control, and fear kept the galaxy safe, was dust in the wake of this human. Mason Hale had faced death incarnate with nothing but trust, and death itself had lowered its head. The captain forced himself to stand taller, though his voice faltered when he spoke. "You have changed what cannot be changed. The galaxy will not accept this." Mason's faint smile returned, though his eyes remained hard. Maybe the galaxy needs to change. The clearing remained tense, the air heavy with unspoken truths. Darrick knew then that this story would not end here on a mist-drenched world. It would ripple outward, carried by rumor and fear, until every starfaring race questioned what humans were truly capable of. And when that reckoning came, nothing would remain the same. Beneath the eerie glow of the alien chamber, silence pressed down like a weight. The towering apex predators stood motionless, eyes burning with predatory fire, muscles coiled as if the slightest tremor would unleash devastation. Around them, the alien counselors, once so haughty and certain of their superiority, sat rigid in their carved thrones, their expressions stretched thin with dread. They had assembled their greatest weapons, their crown jewels of terror, and yet in the presence of the human, all of it unraveled. Mark stepped forward with deliberate calm, his boots echoing against the polished stone. The predators tracked his every movement, not with aggression, but with something closer to reverence. The council had expected a clash of blood and fury, an inevitable demonstration of human fragility crushed beneath true apex power. Instead, they were confronted with the sight of beasts, creatures bred to hunt, to rend, to conquer, lowering their heads as if acknowledging an ancient master. "You don't understand them," Mark said, his voice low but carrying across the chamber. "You think power comes from fear. You think control is about chains and domination. But they don't bow to you because you never gave them a reason to trust." He extended a hand, fingers steady, toward the largest of the predators, a beast with scales dark as obsidian and fangs that gleamed like ivory blades. Gasps rippled through the chamber, claws scraped stone, and for a heartbeat the universe seemed to hold its breath. The monster leaned forward, nostrils flaring, its head the size of a small car. One wrong move and Mark would be obliterated. Instead, with a rumbling exhale, the predator pressed its forehead gently against his palm. The gesture was almost tender, and the shock that tore through the alien assembly was visible. Mandibles quivering, eyes wide, limbs trembling. The deadliest predator in their arsenal had accepted a human as kin. Commander Rail surged to his feet, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Impossible. They are not tamed. They are not." His words faltered as another predator, a massive quadruped with spines jutting from its back, slinked forward to join the first. Mark didn't flinch. He placed his other hand on its armored snout, and the beast chuffed softly, lowering itself as though in submission. "Impossible?" Mark's gaze cut to the commander, steady and unflinching. "You've spent centuries trying to break them. Humanity spent millennia learning to live beside them. We didn't conquer predators, we respected them. Wolves became companions. Horses carried us across continents. Even lions, even bears, we learned to see them, to understand them. That's why they trust me. That's why they'll never truly trust you." The words landed like thunder, echoing across the chamber. A ripple of murmurs rose among the counselors, confusion battling against denial. But even as they tried to dismiss it, the predators themselves proved Mark right. They circled him not as prey, not even as rival, but as a guardian among their own kind. One lay down at his feet, muscles relaxing into trust, while another brushed past him protectively, eyes fixed on the alien officials as if daring them to move. For Rail, panic broke into desperation. His claws scraped along the armrest of his throne as he leaned forward. "Do you realize what you've done? You've upended balance. These creatures are not meant to obey. If they turn against us, they will slaughter entire worlds." Mark's expression hardened. "And whose fault would that be? You engineered them, chained them, turned them into weapons for your wars. You're terrified of them because deep down you know they see through you. But they don't want slaughter. They want to belong. That's what you never understood." He gestured to the largest beast, its golden eyes gleaming with uncanny intelligence. "They chose. Not because I forced them, not because I broke them, but because I offered something you never could, trust." The chamber shuddered as one of the beasts released a guttural roar, not of fury but of allegiance. The sound reverberated through the walls, rattling bones and shaking hearts. The counselors recoiled, some clutching at their ceremonial robes, others shielding themselves instinctively as if death was seconds away. Yet Mark stood unshaken, his hand still resting on the predator's head. And then the predators moved, not to attack him, not to lash out at the aliens, but to encircle him fully, a living wall of fang and muscle and loyalty. The symbolism was undeniable. Humanity had achieved what no empire, no ancient race, no genetic masterwork had ever managed, to stand not above apex predators, nor beneath them but beside them. A heavy silence fell, broken only when Elder Varix, oldest of the council, rose with trembling limbs. His voice was frail, yet each word carried the weight of history. "We feared you humans, feared what your kind might become. Now I see we feared the wrong thing. You are not masters of death, you are allies of life. And that is far more dangerous." Mark inclined his head but didn't smile. We never wanted to rule. But if you force us, if you keep trying to measure us by how much destruction we can cause, you'll only prove how little you understand. We are not your slaves and neither are they. His hand tightened briefly on the predator's snout. Remember that the next time you think to test us. The weight of his words hung over the chamber like a storm cloud. The aliens who had once regarded humanity as an upstart, primitive species were left shattered by the revelation. They had measured strength in claws and armies, yet here stood a human whose quiet touch had swayed the deadliest creations in the galaxy. And then, as if to drive the point home, the predators moved as one. They lowered their heads to the ground in a display of unity, a gesture that could only be interpreted one way: acknowledgement of kinship. The council could not mistake it. Humanity had not only survived their trial, it had turned their most fearsome weapons into allies. Mark stepped back, the beasts parting like a tide, their massive forms creating a pathway straight through the chamber. He paused at its center, turning once more toward the council. This is the choice you face. Fear us, or stand with us. But understand this, if you choose fear, it won't be us you should worry about. It'll be them. He nodded toward the beasts, whose eyes still burned like suns. The council sat in stunned paralysis, the truth undeniable. They had unleashed predators to test humanity, and instead witnessed humanity redefine what power truly meant. Not dominance, not terror, but connection. And as Mark walked from the chamber, the predators followed in silent procession, their heavy steps like the tolling of war drums. The message was clear: humanity had claimed its place, not through conquest but through something far more unshakable. The aliens had panicked when they saw a human pet their apex predators. Now they understood why. Because in that simple act lay the revelation that would reshape the galaxy. Humanity was the only species predators trusted. And that made humans the most dangerous beings of all.